Hello everybody, it is Saturday the 14th of October and we're almost halfway through Vlogtober. I thought for today's video I'd come out into the open countryside, as it were, and talk a little bit about the lifeblood of Abingdon through the ages, probably all the way until the modern era, which is the River Thames. A few things of note about the River Thames. It's the largest river in England. I think it's the largest river in Britain in terms of its length as much as its volume of water, although there are several estuaries like the Severn estuary, the Clyde estuary and so on, which probably have greater girth, width, depth in parts than the Thames does. But the Thames runs from the coast beyond London at Essex and Kent on the north and south banks of the estuary, all the way through London, up through Middlesex and Berkshire into Oxfordshire, and rises somewhere in the Oxfordshire Cotswold Hills at various points with springs and other tributaries. Abingdon was a significant place in the medieval economy because from the sea as far as Abingdon the river was navigable by large boats, but from Abingdon westwards, so from Abingdon to Oxford and so on all the way up to its source, the river was much more a series of shallows connected by streams. And indeed, if you go into Oxford you can still see lots and lots of different routes where the river still currently flows, but also where it had previously flowed and has now been redirected into a narrower area. For the eagle-eared among you, you may just be able to hear a background rumble underneath the rumble of the plane overhead. I am currently standing in a farmer's field which has been harvested, as you can see behind me, and in that direction, so going westwards and northwards, is Radley and then Sandford and finally Oxford, and in the other direction going that way is Abingdon and Reading and London. So I've come to this particular location for a very good reason. As I was saying, the River Thames in this part of Oxfordshire, then Berkshire, was very, very narrow with creeks, not too dissimilar to the kind of creek that I'm just crossing now on this little bridge. You can see it's partly dried up, partly stagnant water, and that's partly because this is no longer used in any great way, shape or form as navigation waters now, so it's become rather overgrown in the last 100-200 years. But as I go through the trees, you'll be able to hear a weir. And this weir is very significant. As you can see, I hope you can see, it's flowing down below me. This was the first pound lock to be introduced on the River Thames. In about 1600, the people of Oxford needed to have a better way of transporting their goods from the city down to London to the markets, and the traditional way was to take it overland from carts, cutting across country, bypassing Abingdon and loading up at Burcott. And this was obviously slow, laborious, expensive and not very efficient. So the people of Abingdon and the people of Oxford got together and they paid to have a channel cut from the river behind me, bypassing Abingdon, which is slightly to the north of where we're standing, and slightly to the south of where we're standing, and meeting up with the river on the south side of Abingdon, just north of Burcott. And this significantly sped up the transportation of goods from Oxford down into the markets in London and Reading and the like, and from there overseas. The other thing that it's called the Swift Ditch because it was just a canal really, before canals were thought of as canals, in the modern sense of being new navigable waters. This was just a channel being cut from one part of the river to another part of the river and was populated by river water. The pound lock is pretty much like the modern locks that you see today, and it was an innovation of its kind because previously boats had to go down the weir on the way downriver and then be winched up over the weir going upriver, and obviously this was expensive and could cause damage and could cause flooding, could cause the loss of the cargo and all the rest of it. So the pound locks, such as we have them today, was a significant technological step forward on the rivers. And there used to be a lockkeeper here and another lockkeeper on South Abingdon, and they had lockkeepers' houses, and their job was just to man the locks, help the traffic go through, take the tolls from people who had to pay, and that kind of thing. What the Swift Ditch also did was to give significant definition to an area of the Thames which had existed all the way back in Saxon times. And I'm just crossing another little branch of the Thames that runs through here, which, as you can see, is very slow moving and is mostly silted up now. And as I walk over the bridge, I come onto what's known as Andersea Island. And Andersea Island is a very significant Anglo-Saxon site. There is a lot of documentary evidence that suggests that there is somewhere on this patch of land between the two branches of the Thames, the main river ahead of me and the small tributary to the side of me, somewhere on this patch of land is an Anglo-Saxon palace. Kings were known to have lived here during the Saxon period. But as with all Saxon architecture, it is, unfortunately, extremely ephemeral. It is mostly wood built and wattle and daub filling and thatch, and all of these things can catch fire, can rot in the ground, so it's very difficult to actually specifically locate where the settlement and the great halls would be. But we do know that somewhere on this island in the middle of the Thames was a significant Anglo-Saxon settlement. And if I just turn around, you can see just behind me, I hope, in the distance, the spire of St Helen's Church. Maybe I'm standing right in front of it, so maybe you can't. It's very difficult to see on my small screen whether you can see that, but I'll just pan around. These are just open fields. It's public land. There's not very much happening here. Further down on Andersea Island, we have a cricket ground, and there are footpaths which are created by people. Literally, there's no institutional definition of these footpaths. You can see it's just where people have walked over the years and years and years, and they crisscross across here. But the path that I'm currently walking is rather unimaginatively, but very factually, the Thames path. And there is another Thames path on the other side of the road. In fact, the Thames path here normally would go further around. I'm shortcutting across. As you can see, there is a trackway across the middle of this meadow as well. These meadows in the Middle Ages were very valuable land. These were owned by Abingdon Abbey, but they were usually given as a living to priests and significant members of the King's Court. I said in my description of Abingdon Abbey that Abingdon was the second house of the English Benedictine reform of the late Saxon period. By the time of Henry VIII, although Westminster Abbey was also a Benedictine monastery, although Canterbury Cathedral had a Benedictine monastery attached, the monastery at Glastonbury was the preeminent Benedictine house in England. and Abingdon Abbey was second only to Glastonbury. So it was a very significant, rich, influential, powerful institution throughout the whole of the medieval period, with a number of significant achievements in terms of guiding government policy. Now, I'll probably go into some of those on another talk. So I will meet you again in a moment when I'm down by the lock. So I'm walking down the path by the side of the river now. This path probably originated as a towpath alongside the river for the beasts of burden that would have dragged the earlier barges carrying goods along here. As the modern age began in the 19th century, and Dutch barges and other cargo ships began to be able to navigate the main part of the Thames, Swiftditch fell into disuse. So it had about a 200-year golden period of operation, but eventually the traffic began to, the lands around the river were drained, and the traffic began to use the main part of the river coming through Abingdon. And as a result, a new lock was built at Abingdon, and I'm just approaching it, together with moorings on both sides of the lock for boats to wait their turn to go into the lock, but also more recently for pleasure boats to have somewhere to tie up overnight, or for people to tie up their boats and come and visit the town and make use of the facilities and enjoy their time around. So as you can see, there's a boat moored on the other side. Most of them are moored on this side. There are two just coming up behind me, and I've passed several as I walk along the river that way from that side. So I'm just approaching the lock mooring now. So once I get to the lock itself, I will hopefully be able to capture a boat going through the lock to show you the lock in action. Now at Abingdon Lock. Abingdon Lock is one of a number of locks along the riverside, or along the river rather, and unlike many locks today, it is still a manned lock, and there is a notice on the other side of the lock saying to boats coming up that this is a lock, has a lock keeper on duty. The lock keeper's house is a very nice detached house sitting next to the lock. It looks terribly isolated, but in fact it's less than 5 minutes, certainly less than 10 minutes walk to the town centre and to people living on the other side of the river. So it feels wonderfully rural, but is actually quite urban at the same time. There isn't a boat in the lock at the moment, I don't think, but I can see the lock keeper is at work clearing something. Probably cleaning, yes, he's cleaning his steps and just making sure that everything is kept in good condition. I'll hang about for a little while and just see whether any boats actually come through, and if they don't, then unfortunately we'll not capture the lock in action, but I will walk further around and describe more of the town to you. So I'm standing downriver now of Abingdon Lock, and the lock is behind me. At the moment there don't seem to be any boats wanting to go through the lock, so I'm not having much luck, but I will hang around for a little while longer. I can see a boat coming up the river, and you can see in the distance the spire of St Helen's Church just above the top of the red leaves on the trees there, and there's a white cruiser coming towards us. There is very little commercial traffic on the Thames these days. Most of it tends to be pleasure cruises, so either privately owned boats or commercially hired vehicles, and there are some cruises that you can go on just as a day trip, particularly from Abingdon to Oxford. Well, it appears as though we're in luck. This boat does look as though it's actually coming through the lock, so people are just crossing before the lock keeper starts to open the gates, which he is now doing, as you can see. The lock works on a very simple principle, that the boats come in at the level of the water from below. The gates then close, and sluice gates in the bottom of the far gates are opened, which then raise the water level inside the lock until it's at the same level as the water on the other side of the lock. And then the back gates are opened and the boat sails out. So we'll just watch as this happens. We're very fortunate that today's lock keeper is a very friendly person. He's just letting the children close the bottom lock gates before he comes up and opens the top ones. One of the reasons Abingdon Lock is a manned lock gate is this is one of the primary river defences as well. A few years ago, locks further upstream were opened in order to allow the water to escape down the river because of the difficulties of flooding higher up in the hills. This led to a concern at Abingdon that the lock gates would be kept closed because the river is protecting Reading and the west end of London upstream from a flood surge. In the events, although the flood did break the banks, the river broke the banks in a couple of places, the worst fears were allayed and there was no terrible problem. And I think you can just see there that the sluice gates at the bottom of the top gates have now been opened and the water is coming in from above the gates, which is slowly raising the water level, and the boat is beginning to rise. These are very similar locks to the ones that would have been installed in the 17th century on the Swift ditch, except that probably would have been a single gate and there would have been a counterbalance beam that would have been manually pushed. These locks today are completely controlled by electronics. And as you can see, there are actually two gates which meet in the middle and provide not completely watertight but almost watertight seal. Certainly sufficient for the task in hand. And the usual speed limit on Britain's waterways is 4 nautical miles, which is about 5 miles per hour on land, and as you can see, the sign on the lock gate says 8 kilometres per hour, which is the equivalent of 5 miles per hour and 4 knots. The water's moving into the lock much more quickly now. It's beginning to really swirl and fill up, and the gates will be opening once the water reaches the dark line at the top of the gate. And the boat continues to rise with the water, naturally. And you'll notice that the boater has not completely moored the boat. She's wrapped a mooring rope around the mooring buoy, but obviously when the boat was lower in the water, when the water was lower and the boat was lower in the lock, she needed a longer piece of rope, and as the water rises and the boat rises, the rope needed to hold the boat still gets shorter and shorter, so the lock keeper's slowing down the water ingress by closing down some of the sluice gates and making it more gradual as it fills up to the top. So the water's reached the same level, the gates have opened, the boat will now be able to go through to the upper reaches of the river. And there we go, Abingdon Lock in action. So So the other means by which the water is controlled in the river, because obviously with the lock gates closed, at least on one side if not the other, all day and all night, there could be a significant build-up of water behind the lock gates. So we have a series of sluice gates and weirs. I think you can see down there, sluice gates are allowing some of the water through, and on this side we have much bigger sluice gates and much more water rushing through all the time. The sound of rushing water is just a very exciting sound. I don't know what it is, and it always gives me a bit of a thrill. Anyway, I'll just walk along to the other side of the river again and we'll carry on the path to the town centre. So as I walk along the river to the town centre, you can see the weir of Abingdon Lock behind me. And I'm just rounding a bend, and as I come around the bend, I'll just switch the camera to the front view for you. Come around the bend of the river, you can begin to see the Abingdon Bridge in the distance with cars going over it. And on the other bank is the park in front of the Abbey Gardens, which is very popular with people walking dogs and children playing, and there's a very new adventure play park there for the younger children to play in. And the facilities generally have been significantly upgraded in the last few years to try and improve the attraction of Abingdon as a marina, as a place for people on the river to moor their boats and spend a little bit of time getting to know a beautiful town and its history, and of course to spend their money in the shops. So I'm here now, almost in the town centre. As you can possibly hear, I am being greeted by flocks of geese who possibly think I've got something for them to eat. The river is a very popular place for ducks, geese, swans and the like. I should mention, actually I think that's a rather attractive view behind me. There you have the spire of St Helens Church peeping up over the trees with Abingdon Bridge in the foreground. That's actually, although it's Abingdon Bridge to most people, technically I believe that's the Culham Road Bridge, because if you go west from Abingdon, the next village you come to is Culham. I don't think it particularly matters, but everyone knows it now as Abingdon Bridge. But technically I believe Abingdon Bridge was the bridge that crossed the Ock on the Drayton Road, rather than the bridge that crossed the Thames on the Dorchester Road, as it would have been on the Henley and Reading Road. I've mentioned before that places have different names and people call things, I mean, I myself have different names that I'm known by. The River Thames, when it flows through Oxford, is actually known as the Isis, which I think is probably just 18th century Oxford pretension, but undergraduates being undergraduates and rich undergraduates being even more so, it is known as the Isis until it gets to Donington Bridge. So Abingdon Lock is about half a mile in that direction, upriver. Beyond that is Sandford Lock, about 3 miles further upriver, and then about 2 miles further upriver from that, maybe a mile further upriver from that, is Donington Bridge, which was built in the 1930s. And Donington Bridge was the old ring road before the new ring road proper was built, much later on in the 1970s, I guess. And anywhere north on the river then, until you come to Botley, it's known as the Isis. The other significant thing about the Thames at Abingdon, it's a piece of common knowledge that the Crown in England owns all the swans on the Thames, all the wild swans that are on the Thames, and owns them in the sense that in the medieval period, of course, swan meat was served at banquets and was considered to be a great delicacy because it was such a rarity. In order to know how many swans the monarch has, there became a ritual carried out every spring, where the number of mating pairs on the Thames were counted, and in order to ensure that swans were not counted twice, they were marked with a number on their underside. And so every year the swans were turned over in order to see how many mating pairs there were and to give them their numbers. And this tradition became known as swan upping, and even to this day, every May, liveried companies of city guilds from the City of London come in barges up the Thames as far as Abingdon and count the number of swans. It's now obviously a conservancy issue, but in its day it was quite an important way of marking the sovereign's property, and for the sovereign to know exactly what he or she, usually he, owned. So I hope you've enjoyed today's little tour of the river around Abingdon. We've come from a mile north up near the Swift Ditch, and we are now surrounded by a flock of geese and ducks, and I think I have said everything that I can think of at the moment. So on that happy note, I will say goodbye, and I will speak to you again tomorrow. So for now, bye bye. As you will have realised by now, I am ever the one for an afterthought. I thought I would just, whilst I'm up near the bridge, and in fact there's a bus from one of my companies going over the bridge. That would be, I'm not sure what service it is, but it's Thames Travel, so that's very nice to see them off and about. This is a rather... I've mentioned that the lack of facilities for the public to enjoy the river. Obviously there are the walkways and a couple of benches on this side of Andersea Island. But generally speaking, there is not much in the way of enjoyment facility on the river side. So I just wanted to show you the Nag's Head pub. It's a very good pub, does very good beers, very good food, and also does live music. And it has two beer gardens down by the river, one of which is a kind of restaurant area, the other one is where you can just have a pint or have some beer snacks, pub snacks rather, to enjoy by the river. There are a few houses on this side of the river as well, and in the distance behind me, I think if I move this way you can see it better, you'll see an octagonal shaped, I think it's octagonal, could be hexagonal shaped building round about here, and that's the Old Prison, the Old Town Prison, which has now been converted into luxury flats, and they have a riverside view and people like them very much. And then finally, the only other building with the riverside facility is the, if I bring my finger over here, that's the Upper Reaches Hotel, which is where the old mill was, and the mill stream that I showed you when I was showing you the buildings and the little ginnel cut through from the main abbey. I'm going to carry on walking round, and if I see anything else I will add on little bits of extra, because it occurred to me that I've only done the north side of the river and of the town and not actually gone to the south side, so I'll just walk around towards the marina and see if there's anything else of interest that I can point out to you. So I will speak to you again in a moment. Well, I guess one of the things I could have considered before I decided to prematurely end my little tour of the riverside is the spectacular view that this side of the river affords of St Helen's Church and the various historic buildings that I described when I was giving a tour of the churchyard earlier. These are the backs of the brick alley almshouses, and I think you can just see ahead where the person is walking the long alley almshouse. This is a beautiful bit of park on this side of the river, and there we have three beautiful swans enjoying what is actually a really pleasant, calm, warm, mild breeze kind of an afternoon. It's about midday, and it's really a very, very, very pleasant day. So I'll just get some footage of the ducks and the swans for you. If fact, one of them thinks I've got food, but unfortunately, Mr. Swan, I don't have anything for you. And across the way, we can see the bridge where the Och meets the Thames. As I mentioned before, this is the Wilton Berkshire Canal Company bridge. This was actually a bridge that was slightly more to the left originally, where the old canal used to come out into the river, which is now a little park built on the corner of land. The canal has been filled in as no longer necessary, and the bridge was used to bridge the river instead. So I've now walked for about a mile out of the town of Abingdon to the south, and have come to the very southern edge of the town with these lovely riverside properties down here, and the Abingdon Marina, which is the area through the back there. It's just where boats are moored rather than going anywhere. I'm just going to carry on south eastwards along the river just for a short while, but I'll explain why when we get there. But you may be able to see up ahead, where I've just walked, there are now some sailboats out on the river as well. So it's a very busy and popular stretch of the river. So I'm now at the southernmost end of my little walk today. Behind me you can just see the houses that I showed just a moment ago that were the end of the town of Abingdon, and I'm currently standing on a little wooden bridge with a road bridge just behind me, behind those trees, and the water that runs below, which I think you can see is running there. This is the southern end of the Swift Ditch, which, as I said earlier, was the waterway cut through to avoid the long detour around the town of Abingdon during the early modern period, which eventually fell into disuse and is now quite badly overgrown and not really very passable. Although I have seen on YouTube and a kayak camera where somebody kayaked the length of the ditch, the Swift Ditch, and it's low resolution, but it's worth a look if you want to see the condition of the Swift Ditch now. And just finally, as I walk along the path back towards the town, behind me, well, next to me is a lovely boat that's moored up, these boats are really very attractive boats. But just behind me in the background, you should start to see looming into view what has historically been, well, I say historically, for the last 50 years or so, been a significant landmark in this part of Oxfordshire. And it will come into view as I round this small trackway that I'm walking along, not really watching where I'm going. I seem to have found a friend who likes to run around, but there you can see in the background 3 of the remaining cooling towers at Didcot Power Station. Didcot had previously, I think, 6 towers, but several were demolished a few years ago, and it was a big event locally, and people came from all around the county to watch the towers being demolished, because Oxfordshire, although it's hilly, isn't very high hills, and so the power station has been a landmark for people for a long time. Unfortunately, a year ago, one of the demolition teams was preparing a building for demolition when it collapsed, and sadly 3 of the people who were working there were killed, which has slowed down the remaining demolition. It's being demolished because it was previously a coal-fired power station. It's now being, or has now been, converted into being a gas-fired power station. So the cooling towers and ancillary buildings are simply no longer required. I have one more little bit of a clip to give you when I finally get back near home, but it's a good 1.5 miles from here, so I will say goodbye for now and see you in 20 minutes, half an hour or so. On my way back, I thought we'd just get some very nice shots of boats sailing on the river. It's a beautiful day, there's just a calm breeze, so there's enough to move, but not so much to make it uncomfortable. And it looks as though they're having fun. I've made my way back now down towards home, and I've just come to a little side channel of the Thames. Abingdon Lock is upstream in that direction. And if you carried on along this stream going in this direction, it would take you past the Abbey buildings and out at the weir next to the Upper Reaches Hotel and rejoins the Thames. So in this video I've walked the whole distance of Anglesey Island from the Swift Ditch origin north of Abingdon Lock, about a mile north of Abingdon Lock, to where it ends about a mile and a half, 2 miles south of Abingdon Lock. And lots of interesting things in between. And that ditch was built in the 17th century, about 1624 I think is the date for it, which is an early canal by any measure and would have been quite a significant feat of engineering at the time. The significance of this particular branch of the river is that it predates that branch by about 600 years and is also entirely man-made. It was a common phenomenon with monks who settled when they built their monasteries. They wanted a supply of fresh water, and so they would dig channels from the main river, divert it around their monastery, and then rejoin the river further downstream. Sorry, there was just a large group of people walking past. It was quite common, as I say, for monks to want to have their own water supply, and so they would just channel rivers. And in some places, like Revo in North Yorkshire, they completely changed the path of the river, which was a much smaller affair than the Thames. So the monks in sometime in the 970s, 980s, dug this canal and directed the water, which then became available as drinking water, and then for cooking and cleaning water, and finally their latrines emptied at the west end of the monastery, and indeed the east end of the monastery, and in my own monastery, when plumbing was introduced in the 19th century, they were all still put at the east end of the building. It's been a monastic practice to always have the latrines at one end of the building and living at the other end. And even though I hasten to add, there's normal plumbing systems installed, it's a thoroughly modern monastery now. So yes, and this, as I say, this channel comes out at the weir next to the Upper Reaches Hotel, and the weir stands where the Abbey's watermill would previously have been. That watermill was the only mill in this area right the way until the townsfolk were given their charter in the 15th century, in the 1440s, which is when St Helen's Mill that I showed you when I was walking around St Helen's churchyard was built. So that concludes the tour of the river for today, and I hope you've enjoyed this little look around my lovely little town here. It is every bit as picturesque as it comes across on these videos. It's a really wonderful place to live, and I'm really happy that 11 years ago I made the decision to move here. So until tomorrow, I will be making a podcast for my main channel later on today, but if you're only following the Vlogtober casts, then until tomorrow, thank you very much for spending some time with me, and I will speak to you again then. So bye.